You're listening to The Bible Guys, a podcast where a couple of friends talk about the Bible in fun and practical ways.
Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Chris.
Today we're talking about one of the most famous passages in the Bible, the lost son or the prodigal son.
I think I've preached on this story of Jesus more than any of the other stories Jesus has taught.
Oh, really?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, it's certainly one of the best.
I love it. Yeah. This is one of the good ones as opposed to, the ones that you don't like. Is that what you're saying? It's one of the best?
No,
You're kind of implying that there's some that are less best.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are ones that are favored in my spirit.
Oh, your favorite.
No,
Favorites.
favored.
Favored. Okay.
Yes. I favor this one.
All right.
How about
good.
that?
Yeah,
How
me
about
too.
that? Yes.
Me too. It's one of my favorites.
So today we're actually going to start with our segment that Desiree put together. Actually, this is so fun. We're talking about where are our listeners from?
Yes.
And by the way, we have listeners, apparently, you know this more than I do.
Mm-hmm.
We have listeners not just in the United States, but around the world, right?
Germany, India, Ireland, South Africa.
It's pretty crazy, right?
Man, I've forgotten. Yeah, a whole bunch of countries around the world.
Yeah,
it's really
for
cool.
sure.
So welcome. Thank you for listening.
Yes. And so we're going to actually just name a few facts about this particular city that is in a state that is in the United States.
Okay.
So I'm giving the
And
hints.
we're going to have people try to guess where.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, number one,
Yep.
the nation's first shopping cart was used here in 1937.
Who would ever know that? Unless they were from this area.
I guess Desiree.
Well, she Googled,
She knew.
She Googled that stuff.
Okay.
All right, number two. Ever get a ticket from an expired parking meter? This was the first place to install these, leading to their widespread popularity.
I don't think they're very popular. I think governments like to use them.
Well, they're popular in the government.
Boo. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Hey, by the way,
I wonder what
first
that
shopping
is.
cart and first parking meter. Wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
It's home to America's only skeleton museum, the Museum of Osteology, with over 450 skeletons on display. Ooh.
Wow. By the way, I would have no reason to know any of those things.
Are you tired?
Well, this
That was
light.
rough.
This light.
Okay. You would
Okay.
have no reason to know any of those things.
No, is that what I said?
Yes.
All right, here it is. Here's the fourth statement and final statement.
Okay.
There's a swimming pool shaped like the state of at the local governor's mansion. That's how it reads, right?
I think that there's a couple words. That
There's a couple typos in that
I
one.
think it's supposed to say there's a swimming pool shaped like the state at the governor's mansion.
Yes.
Oh, well, that makes it clear.
Yes.
She should have just started with that one.
Right. So
What is it?
It is
Do-do-do-do.
Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma people.
Which, by the way, I almost took a job in Oklahoma City.
Did you?
I almost did. Yeah.
Wow.
Can you imagine?
That would have been incredible.
I would have been a part of Oklahoma City.
Yes. Well, you probably would have been one of the listeners to my show.
You and Wesley.
Yeah.
Or you and Kyle Dalbenmeyer.
Yeah. Another Bible guy.
Another Bible guy.
No, that's good. I wouldn't want another Bible guy.
Oh, thanks, Jeff.
Right. They can sit in, but they can't replace you.
Oh, that's fun.
Mm-hmm.
So today
Okay.
we're jumping into Luke 15.
Well, I think you're supposed to ask listeners to comment on where they're from.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, we love that.
It's amazing.
Yeah, we love that. We love getting feedback all the time. Anytime that you take an extra minute, we know that it's not just listening. You're like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to comment. I'm going to write in. I'm going to email them at info@thebibleguys.com. And I'm going to take a minute to either ask a question that we could use on a segment in the future, or just let us know where you're listening from.
It's super humbling that people keep listening. That's why we keep doing it, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So anyways, thank you guys. Thank you.
Hey, everybody, just as a reminder, we are taking a break between the week of Christmas and New Year's. So there'll be no Bible Guys during that week, but we will see you back again after the first of the year. All right, buddy. Well, today we're jumping into the prodigal son, Luke chapter 15.
Yes.
And this is only found in the book of Luke.
Right.
So the other gospel authors do not record this.
Mm-hmm. So the headline of mine says the parable of the lost son.
Yeah, it's so funny how it's known as the prodigal son.
Prodigal son.
But it's actually the
But
lost,
do you like the word
the lost
prodigal?
sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. Makes more sense that way, doesn't it?
Yeah. Do you like the word prodigal?
Outside of this parable, nobody uses really the word prodigal.
Mm-hmm. I just noticed you use it a lot.
Well, because it's known that way by far.
Yeah.
Nobody says the lost son.
Yeah.
My whole entire life.
I always
when
get
people
yelled
refer
at
to
when
this
I
story-
use the word fellowship.
Oh, you're saying it's just prodigal.
It just sounds like a churchy word to me.
It sounds like a churchy word.
Yeah. It just seems like you should be mad about it.
You know what? I think I might get mad about it.
All right. Well, there's an extra segment today.
All right. Well, there it is.
Okay. There you go.
Okay.
That word prodigal.
Which, by the way, somebody found me in the lobby and listens to the Bible Guys on a regular basis. And every time it's Friday, they anticipate what made Chris mad today. And when it's not, like today's Friday.
Yeah, such a disappointment.
Right. Well, he says, every time that it's Friday and we don't do what made Chris mad today, he goes, I think to myself, come on, guys, it's Friday. That's what he says. He gets so mad.
Well, now you know. Now you know. For that listener,
Yes.
it's the word prodigal. Prodigal son.
Yes.
Makes you mad.
That makes me mad today.
It's such a churchy word.
But
Okay.
do people use it outside of the Bible? Prodigal? Because that's my big thing.
I think they use fellowship way more than prodigal.
You think prodigal is not used at all, huh? Because nobody uses fellowship, Jeff.
Fellowship of the Rings.
Yes.
Okay, here we go. In Luke chapter 15, verse 11, it says this. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. I didn't even know that was an option. Did you?
You talking about today? Please give me my inheritance. By
Hey,
the way,
Dad.
I know somebody who went to their mom and dad and said, hey, I'm really in financial straits. You're going to die in about 10 years. Can I have it now?
Wow. Okay.
And guess what?
Didn't work.
They said no.
Yeah. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land, and there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into his fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I'll go home to my father and say, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I've sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he's found. And so the party began. Meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working, and when he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house, and he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back, he was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We're celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him, but he replied, All these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet, when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, you celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, Look, dear son, you've always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found.
Okay,
What a
so
story.
It is a heck of a story. So I have something fun that I want to do.
Do it.
Completely different.
Okay.
For me and you both.
Okay, here we go.
Okay. So instead of, because there's so much, even as you were reading it, you were like, okay, we could talk about 15
Everything
or
in
20
here is great.
things,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Okay. So instead of like picking out a point and then like talking about it and then not getting through the whole thing, I want to have a little fun.
Okay.
Let's actually point out every little nuance of this story to bring it to the reader. Like, hey, did you notice this,
Yeah.
and not talk about it at all until we get through all of them.
Okay.
And then we'll go back and talk about the ones that we want.
Okay.
Is that fun?
That sounds good.
Okay. So what's okay? I'll start.
You go.
The first thing that stands out to me is that the younger son was the one who actually asked for his inheritance, when actually that right belonged to the older one,
son, yeah.
which means the fact that it was the younger son, he had audacity.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Then after he got it, it didn't take very long, and he ditched his family.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
He packed everything and moved to a distant land. I think he moved to Vegas. I think
Yeah.
that's what he did.
Yeah. Here's another thing that stands out is that when his money ran out, he had no more friends. And so he's spending his life riotously around
Yep.
people.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden he's so alone. He has to go find like the worst job ever.
Yeah. And so then the worst job winds up being feeding pigs. And for a Jewish kid, there's nothing worse.
Right. Because
Pigs were unclean.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then how about this one? So he rehearses a speech.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
And in the speech, we even hear the whole speech. But then when he actually gets to his father, he only gets the first line out before his father
cuts him
interrupts him. There's another point.
Yeah. I love that. I love it when while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming and ran out filled with love.
Which means it could indicate what?
It means he was waiting for him. He was watching for him.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Which, by the way, the father didn't go and chase him down. He didn't go drag him out of Vegas riotous living. He just waited. He waited for his son to come home.
Yeah, and then here's another point. The older son comes in, and the rest of the whole scripture, from verse 25 all the way down, is the older son's reaction.
Yeah.
And I would venture to say, let's not forget the reason why Jesus told this story was because the Pharisees were murmuring and grumbling.
Right.
So he told the story about the lost sheep, lost coin, and the lost son. And so even though that this story is about the younger son, it's actually for the older son.
Right.
Because the point of the story is actually for the older son, which is like, whoa. Like rejoicing is allowed for somebody who was lost and is now found.
Right.
Yep.
And he's also dealing with the family dynamics of this too. Because, this sin wasn't only against the dad. He brought shame on the whole family. The older brother was the future representative of the family, right? All these things. So I'm not surprised by the older brother's response.
No, not at all.
Right.
Not at all.
And then I think that the father was as gentle and kind to the older brother as he was to the younger brother, right?
Yeah.
In the way that he responded to him. Hey, everything I have is yours.
Right.
Right. So I think it's the other thing is the father puts, we skipped this, but he put the finest robe on him. He gave him a ring. He put shoes on him. So shoes are just necessary. That's every day. The robe establishes family status. The ring is literally the family credit card, right? And so he put his son back into a position as a son and not as just a slave or a servant or somebody the father was ashamed of, right? He was proud of his son coming back. And, a lot of times we're tempted, I think, to bring people back into our lives, but in a secondary role rather than in the role they had been in before or whatever.
Yeah.
And the father didn't do that. He brought him back and reestablished him.
Yeah. And then another thing is that if you think about it, his father ran out to both sons. So, because what did he do? He ran while his youngest son was a long way off.
Yeah.
And searched for him and found him on the road and ran out to him. And then when the older brother left the party, the father left the party and went out to find the other son.
Yeah, his father came out.
Right. So in other words, he looked for and sought out both sons.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything else we're missing in here?
Maybe one last thing, and that is both sons needed rescued. Right. So the first son needed rescued from obvious things, the younger son needed rescued from obvious things, right? And I would say the older son needed rescued perhaps from a mentality that was the whole point of Jesus trying to speak into the Pharisees.
Yeah, making room for lost people to come home.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I would say there's one other thing, and that is you don't have to ruin your life to be in the story.
Right.
Right? So the older brother didn't ruin his life. So the younger brother squandered. It would have, if there were only the two brothers, normally, this isn't every time, but a man of means like this, normally the older brother would have gotten a double share and the younger brother would have gotten a single share. That's normally how the family wealth would have been passed on in those days. So the younger brother would have gotten 1/3 of his father's wealth and the older brother would have gotten 2/3 of the father's wealth. So the younger brother goes out and wastes in riotous, wild living on, according to his brother, on hookers, wasted 1/3 of his father's wealth.
Yeah.
And the father wasn't angry at him in that moment when he came home.
Hey, go ahead.
But then the older brother, he's complaining, going, you never threw a party for me. And the father goes, let me just remind you, everything else here is yours.
Right.
The house is yours.
Yeah.
All of you're mad that I didn't kill a fatted calf for you. All the calves are yours.
Right.
Right?
Right.
All the rooms in this house are yours. All the servants are yours. All the land is yours. You were faithful. And so the father is gently reminding him, don't get grumpy about this boy, but because you were faithful, everything I have is yours.
Right.
And so we don't have to ruin our lives.
Yeah.
right?
Which by the way, that means that everything that the younger son had is gone.
It's all gone.
It's still gone.
Yeah.
So he's still the son.
Right.
He's still loved. He's
Right.
accepted.
Right.
But everything left is the older son's.
There are consequences. There are consequences to our bad choices, right?
That's right.
So you can be reestablished as a son, be loved, be celebrated, all those kinds of things. But, he's going to spend the rest of his life working for his brother.
The one thing, the other thing that is hidden somewhere in the story, that's a little sermon altogether, is that that we didn't mention, is that so this younger son asked him for something audaciously. But how about this one? Ready? His father actually gave it to him.
Yeah.
And so the question is there wisdom in that? So I remember one time when I was about 6 years old, 7 years old, I tried to sneak a cigarette. And so Kenny McBride and Garrett Connors and Rich Frondorf were like, go inside and grab a cigarette. So I went and I snuck a cigarette and I had it and I was running out. And my mom was sitting there with all her friends. And I was walking by them and my mom goes, hey, what do you got there? And I was like, nothing. And she's like, come here, show me, in front of all her friends. So finally I'm like, here, there's a cigarette. And she goes, why don't you smoke it right now in front of everybody? I'm like, I'm like, really? I'm thinking to myself, I got the coolest mom ever. And she goes, yeah. She's like, why don't you go ahead and smoke it? So she puts it up to my lips and she lights it. And I go, well, how do you do it? So she knew I didn't know how to do it. She says, oh yeah, you got to puff in. Yeah, so I puff in. And she goes, okay, now you got to do this. Now you got to inhale. Watch this. And so she takes the cigarette and she inhales it like this. She goes, now try that. So I inhale it and I cough to the point to where I almost throw up, right? I'm just hacking, right? And then they're humiliating me by laughing.
Right.
And they're going, ha, 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 ha. They're just pointing and laughing. Right. And so I just leave the cigarette and I run out. And guess what? I never touch another cigarette for the rest of my life.
Right.
And I actually look back at that now and say to myself, you know what? Maybe my mom knew in that moment that if she would have just said, give me the cigarette, I would have tried to sneak another one. But maybe she knew that what I needed was to experience the awfulness of the cigarette. And who knows, maybe if the son who just repeatedly went to the dad and said, give me for years, maybe the son's just like, okay, you've earned every bit of what you're about to learn. And maybe there was wisdom in that we don't really know.
Yeah. Yeah. Throughout the book of Proverbs, there's a lot of parenting advice, right? And most of the time it's about teaching your children the consequences.
Yeah.
Right. Through discipline. Even Proverbs talks about spanking, all those things. Discipline being, to try to teach your kid and prevent your kid from going down the wrong path. That's the better side of parenting. But there are times where the only way the lesson can be learned is by, go ahead, breathe deep.
Yeah, that's right. Go ahead, breathe deep.
Take a deep puff, buddy. So I don't know that this is a lesson on parenting is saying, go ahead and let your kid go ruin his life.
No, I certainly wouldn't say that. I would say, but we don't know if the father did it with intentionality.
Yeah. And everything else. The other thing I think that you see here that's of interest is two kids from the same family.
Mm-hmm.
And one was faithful, did the right thing, was a man of integrity, did everything he could do. The other one went wild. You know what? Sometimes we can feel like failures because one of our kids kind of goes off the rails for a while or whatever. And here's two kids from the same exact family, same dad, same rules, same everything. And one decides to play the victim, decides to ruin his life. And,
I'm not sure I've ever, in all my years of teaching this and reading this and hearing sermons about this, I'm not sure anybody's ever said that. As a parent, it speaks into the fact that sometimes kids are different.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so we can do what we can do as parents, and we can only do as much as we can do.
Right.
And when they become adults, they're responsible for their own choices.
Yeah. So was the father a success because his older son was a man of character, or was the father a failure because his younger son didn't have any?
Yeah.
Right. It's same household, same rearing, probably. Right. So I think a lot of times that's why the book of Proverbs says, raise up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he won't depart from it. It doesn't mean that our children will never make mistakes or that they won't. It's that our job is to raise them pointing them towards God, pointing them towards becoming good moral citizens, preparing them to be good adults, to be good Christians, to be good parents, to contribute to society. But ultimately, they're going to make their own choices.
Yeah.
But the truth is, as they mature, they will come back usually to the truth, the real truth that we raised them in.
Just like the
Even
lost
the
son.
son did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we find out that he really was a good kid.
Right.
Like
Right.
he is a good kid
Yeah.
in this story, because what does he do? He's learned his lesson. He comes back with humility.
Yeah.
We're just to assume that he's back in the fold.
Did you ever hear that song? I think it's from the late 70s or early 80s. He Ran to Me. You ever hear the song?
Yes.
Phillips, Craig, and Dean went back and redid it back in the early 2000s.
Yes.
But He Ran to Me, and it's talking about He ran to me.
You're not talking about
took me in his arms.
so God ran.
Yeah, and God ran.
Yeah. Took me, put my head to his chest, said my son's come home
Yeah.
again.
Yeah, our listeners should go back.
Lifted
Should
my
go
face,
listen to it.
wiped his tears from my eyes.
Yeah,
And with goodness in his heart, he said, son, don't you know I still love you?
yeah. It's such a powerful song.
Yeah.
But He ran to me is that one phrase. It just makes me think about, my dad, he adopted me, but he grew up in a Christian family. So my grandfather, godly man, a significant leader in the little local church in Elba, Michigan, little Methodist church. My grandmother, upstanding lady, it was my aunt, is older than my dad. My aunt grew up to be a good, godly woman, raised a godly family. But my dad, he was a 4-letter athlete, 5-letter athlete every year in high school, superstar kind of a guy. And everybody was giving him attention all the time. And he just decided he'd go to church on Sunday, but in the locker room on Monday, he was the wild guy and just threw off everything that had to do with faith in his everyday life. So then after he graduated from high school, he completely abandoned everything that he was raised in. And my grandmother loved him, would invite him over to the house, have Thanksgiving dinner, Christmas dinner, all those things. But she wasn't super preachy at him. She just was constantly, Glenn, why don't you come to church with me at Christmas? Why don't you come to church with me at Easter? Whatever. He just didn't want to do it. Didn't want to be a part of it, was living his own life. And so she says every day for 40 years, she prayed that he'd come home.
Wow.
Every day for 40 years. And then my dad was 40 years old when he stumbled across, he had some things going on in his life. He stumbles across a tract somebody left and explaining the gospel in the men's room at General Motors plant in Flint, Michigan. And man, God got a hold of him. And over the course of about a 2-week period, God just radically transformed him. He winds up confessing Christ, accepting Christ as his Savior. And my dad was never the same again. I remember my grandmother sitting there, because my grandmother wound up living in a house about 100 feet behind our house on the same piece of property for the last, decade and a half of her life. I remember sitting in her house one time, we were eating snacks, and she said, I'm so glad I never quit praying for your dad. And now I look at it and go, if my grandmother quit praying for my dad, maybe I would have never become a Christian. I didn't come from Christian stock. Right? My brothers probably wouldn't have become Christians. I think of the thousands of people that have been impacted because my grandmother never gave up. And that's what I see with this guy, right? So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son and embraced him and kissed him. That's what our Heavenly Father did for us. He's been waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. But that's what he's doing for the people in our lives that are so far from him too. He's waiting and waiting with patience and love. And I think that's our appropriate response to the people in our lives that are far from God too.
Yeah. And don't forget, you can always go home. You can always come home, and God's going to love you and react this same way, because this represents the kingdom of God.
Yeah.
This represents God the Father. So,
Man, we
All
just scratched the surface, dude.
yeah, I know. But we need to get going. So that's our time. And hopefully we will see you next time on The Bible Guys.